Okay, welcome back to the Daily Arts Challenge, the 100-day art challenge. I have actually been counting, and I think this should be submission number 28. I believe so. And this is out of order chronologically, but I thought I would post this here because it is going to be basically breaking up my oil pastel portraits, and I do a lot of those, and there are many more to come. So I thought, as a treat, I will instead upload me doing an ink drawing, and this is using a Japanese brush pen. Aside from that, I'm also using felt tips, but what I thought would be interesting with this is I think people enjoy seeing the way that I pick through this portrait. It's based on a photograph that I took last year, I believe, at a cattle market, and there were lots of farmers there and obviously lots of cattle, and I took as many photographs as I could and tried to speak to a lot of farmers and soak up the environment. And then when I came back to look through of all the pictures, I noticed that some were really interesting to me. They do auctions in the cattle farm for lambs, for sheep, for cows, all sorts of things like that. I didn't see any pigs or chickens being auctioned, but it's mainly for lambs, for sheep and for cows that I've seen, but all sorts of different types of breeds. And one of these auctions, I took a photograph of a group of farmers, and in the group there was one chap, and you can see them all concentrating and thinking about the profits, the benefits, the health of the cattle and their farm and their future, and all these things that they must be considering before they bid. And this is what I feel I've captured in this photograph that I'm using, is this farmer's concentration on those different aspects of his job and his life. I've drawn him twice. This is the second time that I've drawn him. The first time was in my sketchbook in pencil, and I just like the concentration on his face. I like the way that he's kind of stood ready. He's kind of in this position, just ready to put up his bid or to wait until the right moment. It just seemed to be this time just frozen in this photograph that encapsulates so much of what I was trying to understand in this place that I was visiting. So this particular individual, who I didn't actually meet or speak to, has been one of my muses, just as my friend John Williams has. John I have drawn and painted a couple of times. He's a friend of mine who I spoke to at his farm last year. I think it was last year, unless I'm getting mixed up. It may have been 2022. I don't think it was, but I do lose track. Whereas this chap I've never met. I've shown the picture to John and he doesn't recognise him. But if I go back to the cattle market soon and see him again, I might see if I can engage him in conversation and see how amenable he is to talk to a non-farmer. They do seem to recognise that I'm not one of them. I think you can tell by the clothing and probably by the smell that I'm not one of the farmers, because they all seem to understand that. But I've had lots of nice conversations with farmers. It's been a long time since I've been there, and after the 100-day challenge is over, one of the things I'm going to do is try to finish a painting that I started a long time ago of the cattle market, for the cattle market, because the auctioneer said that he'd be interested in buying a painting of the market if I painted one, and I just haven't finished it. I didn't really have the momentum to drive me to the finish of this painting that I started. It was just too difficult. So now that I'm clocking in more hours painting. I mean, it's been a good month or so since I've painted, but I will start to do more as I upload more of these videos. It will become just important to me to begin again with the daily art practices. At the moment, there are so many other jobs that I can do each day that I try to pick through those. Most of the time it's editing, and I'm sure I can fit in both. It's just that I normally don't. This is one of the more interesting parts of this drawing to me, is how the hat is drawn, the baseball cap that he's wearing, because it looks wrong until the last minute. It looks as though I've made the baseball cap tipped over on his head on a jaunty angle. And if I were drawing this from imagination, I don't think I'd be able to fix it. The reason why I know this drawing so well is that I uploaded it as a time-lapse onto Instagram. I think it was a time-lapse, either that or I uploaded it cut into just snippets of the drawing. No, I think it was a time-lapse actually. But it basically shows how this part comes together. What you don't have on Instagram is the real-time drawing, so I think this is better to watch in this way, because it's not especially long to do a drawing. I think it's quite a nice process to watch back. I enjoy it as a time-lapse because of how the proportions and everything seems to fit better than I initially anticipated, on the rewatch. And you can see from that line there the angle of his head. It's just the outside line there which makes the baseball cap no longer look askew on his head, whereas initially it looked as though his head was straight. I've mentioned this before. When I draw people, I draw their head very straight. I don't draw it tilted. When I draw from reference, I draw the tilted head, but when I draw from imagination, I always fail to put the head on a tilt and a twist a little bit. And that's normally what you do when you're looking at things. You don't have your head perfectly straight looking in a certain direction. You have a natural way of having your head on a swivel, looking at different things and expressing your thoughts and emotions with your physicality as well as with language. So that's all described in the way that you see people posed and positioned. So that's something which I enjoy watching back, and that's why I get a lot of value from these types of drawings of farmers, because it's they don't know that I'm taking a picture of them. They didn't seem to notice. They're too busy focusing on the auction. I don't even think the first drawing I did of this farmer captured that. I don't know, I'll have to have a look at it again. It's been a while. I'll post it on the screen so that you can see it. So it's just a bit of a different submission for the 100-day challenge. I don't do much ink so far. I'm considering doing more for October, because it's going to be Inktober and I have plenty of submissions left in this 100-day challenge. I almost fancy doing that instead of forcing paintings out, which I could rather spend longer on. I'd really like to invest more time in the paintings than what I've been doing. So if I did Inktober to complete the challenge, I could have fun, be a bit more loose, and not have to worry about wasting paint or wasting ideas or wasting canvases, and instead just plough through the rest of the challenge in a way which is enjoyable, creative, and could lead to a painting further down the line. So that's something I'm wrestling with at the moment. But the thing which is stopping me is I did have this romantic idea of painting every day and really learning how to use oil paint better. And if I do lots of ink drawings, then it's even longer that I haven't been using paint than it already has been, which is, as I said, probably about a month, if not more, since I've painted last. It might not actually be that long. I really don't know. Either way, that's what's going through my head at the moment. Do I finish this off with ink? Because this to me is a bit of a different approach. The only other one I think I've done with ink is the 20 or so to go video, which is celebrating the fact that I am on the brink of having 1,000 subscribers, which is an exciting milestone for me to reach. And that's something which I am looking forward to doing as a video as well. So I'm going to have to consider what I'd like to try and achieve for that, and that'll be a whole day I'll probably spend on that piece of artwork, because I'd like it to be something special, because it is an important milestone, and that's something I'm going to keep doing as I reach different subscriber numbers, because it's nice. You know, the amount of time I've invested in the channel has been years now, and I'd like to celebrate the support I've been getting and the interest that it's generating, because I have really enjoyed making videos, and I feel as though they have evolved somewhat, and they are still adapting and developing with my growing knowledge and experience on video production. These videos are quite stripped back to just an intro and the art making and then the outro. That may be the best format for me, but I have enjoyed doing vlog style videos and different more creative edits and shots, and I might start introducing some of those ideas in different ways. I have things that I'd like to use and introduce into videos which I haven't really discussed, so I'm still wrestling with certain ideas that I think are going to help push the channel into a more creative space, maybe later this year, but especially next year. So, as far as this piece goes, how much ink do you put down in black and white before you change the colour? Because that's where this is heading. This is heading into a colour piece, which is not normal for me. If I do an ink drawing, it's normally black and white. But for this challenge, I thought I'd like to inject colour into as many things as possible. The truth is, I could have left this drawing here and just say, that's it, it's done, there's nothing more necessary, and I do quite like a black and white drawing. That's it, finished, 12 minutes. But instead, I decide to venture into some felt tip pens for the finish. And I don't really know how they're going to react with the black pen. Is it going to smear and smudge? And, well, I'll leave for you to see that, because I don't know how clear it's going to be on camera, but it certainly was a risk. And I thought, it's only a quick drawing. As much as I enjoy the drawing, I could obviously edit this to be the end of the video, as I've just said. But it turns out that these pens are quite fun to use. They're a limited colour palette, so there are certain choices I had to make which I would rather have done something else, and perhaps there are better decisions that I could have made were I to understand the palette better. And I've never used a blending marker. I just don't know how and understand how it works. One of the things I thought I would do is to make it very scribbly. If I'm going to put colour down, I don't want it to look like a colouring book. I don't want it to look like I'm trying to colour within the lines. I want it to look artistic, by which I just mean really just applying the colour as smooth and quickly as possible without worrying about leaving white gaps in between, because it's just a coverage that I'm trying to get down. It's just trying to suggest that this is a tone that I'm covering with this part, and this is a tone that I'm putting here, you know, just to create this balance for the clothing and try to give it a different sense of depth than it has with just the black and white description that I've got down so far. And in case you can't see, there is slight smudging happening. It just seems to bleed into it. I think the markers may be alcohol based, because they do seem to bleed through. So underneath this sheet of paper I have another one beneath it, because as much as the desk is dark, it's just good practice to remember to have a bleed page, so to try and make sure that you're not damaging anything underneath the drawing. But it wasn't necessary for this desk. Anyway, so colour wise, as I said, it's a bit limited, but thankfully there are several blue markers, which means that I could differentiate between the colour of the shirts that I'm putting in now, which is underneath his hooded sweatshirt that he's wearing, and the coat that he's wearing on top of his hoodie, because I want there to be two blues and for them to not look like the same thing. And it doesn't look too scribbly except for his hat, but it's all very flat at the moment as well. That's something which I thought about afterwards and considered how I could try to make it slightly more interesting for a finished piece. Now, I don't know if you can tell here, but this is a lot richer a blue. The other one is a bit more of a flat and grey blue, and this one's a very much a darker, highly saturated blue, which was nice to have a difference, because I didn't want to start changing colours necessarily, but that could have been something which I could do in the future if I learn how these markers work. But I wanted to represent what I was seeing on the picture to some extent, and he was wearing blue layers, grey hoodie, brown baseball cap. So that's what I wanted to get down. But as I said earlier, I wanted it to be scribbly, so I didn't want to worry about covering up those marks that are still left untouched by the pen, the white marks that you can see there. If anything, I quite like that. If it were a different type of art piece, then I would cover them up and try to make it clean, but because it's a quick sketch, I think it adds to it to have this looseness there, to really scribble in the colour, because I don't want it to be something that's too precious or too fiddled over, really. I wanted it to be just get down the colour and that's it, done. But there's more to go, because if I left it like that, it would look as though he were a ghost in the clothing. So there needed to be something on his beard and on his face. But as I said, I have a very limited palette. So sadly, the pink was the only thing that I could see that could describe his face. There may have been a better choice, but I couldn't see it at the time. So there it is. It is far too rich a pink for his face. But it's not as bad as it looks. It actually does improve as the piece continues. In a weird way, when I first put it down, I thought that is terrible. I've potentially ruined this drawing, but it is what it is. But then as I left it there, I could see that it was just a tone. That's all I needed. I got the grey back involved and thought this needs to describe certain parts of his beard, just like the underside of his beard will collect shadow. So I did a little shelf for his beard where it seemed to go underneath, and now I'm suggesting different tones of his beard. There are a couple of different greys, so I'm using the warmer of the two greys for that job. But I had to get the pink back out because next to his mouth there is a little bit of skin showing, and I just forgot about that. Different parts of those features on the face or aspects of a portrait can be overlooked, and I don't want to colour them in grey out of laziness, so I wanted to make sure I could correct that. And then getting back out the brown, because parts of his beard had brown in it as well, which made it quite a nice interesting patchwork between the white of his beard, the grey suggesting different tonality, and then the brown which was just connecting to his face. And I thought possibly I could introduce the brown into the eyes, because not into his actual eyes but around his eye socket and then underneath his cap, just as a shadow tone. How does that sit on top of the pink? It didn't hurt, but I didn't want to do too much, because as soon as you start going crazy with it, it can ruin it, and that's not what I was trying to aim for. But the brim of the peak for this cap had an orange edge. It's a small detail, but I think it adds quite a lot. All of these little touches, if you're going to do something which is scribbly and basic like I'm doing here, these little touches can make the difference between making it look like something you don't care about and something which you do. So back to the grey, just a few touches on the beard again. There's always something which, if you look carefully, you could enhance, and that happens throughout the whole portrait, is that if you go over certain parts of the grey, it will go to a slightly darker grey. It's only subtle, and initially you just think, well, does that really do much? It suggests a bit of shadow. It's just enough for me to feel like it hasn't been just discarded and abandoned. It's actually been considered for its tonal nuances in certain parts of the clothing as it turns around corners, as shadows are cast from either the head or from where the environment has light being blocked by something or other. That is useful. I think it's helped with that grey hoodie, so I'm going to do the same thing with the hat now. Just little touches. Now, I did say I wasn't going to touch the white parts of the cap. Turns out I did, but I don't do it on the hoodie, I know that. Not the coat, sorry. So those white marks on the coat are left as they are, and I think that's quite nice. But I do go in with a bit of shadow. And again, it's very subtle. It's not very dark on top of it. It's just darker than it was. Oh no, I'm covering up the white bits. I completely lied. No, I just forgot. I'm sure that I leave certain white marks still. I don't cover them all up. I quite like them anyway, the white marks. But it turns out I did cover them up. And then just suggesting bits of shadow just in the edges, in the little crevices here and there. And again, it's not a massive detailed picture, so it's not going to make it look real, but it does give it more depth than it had otherwise. Colours on their own can look quite flat, and I think that just this little bit of extra time and care to try to show how the clothing creases and what it means when clothing does crease makes things more interesting visually. I think it's far more engaging to just have little bits of darker parts here and there than when they don't. Now, if I've done it on the hoodie and I've just done it on the coat, then surely you've got to do these little touches on the baseball cap, because they will be quite nice. The baseball cap is something which I look at along with the face as some of the first things that catch my eye on the portrait. So to do touches of shadow on the baseball cap will be pleasant to the whole portrait itself, to the picture, to suggest that, again, this is a piece of clothing that you're not just going to put down as a loose description. You're actually going to try to show that it has bits of dents and creases in it, just like every other piece of clothing. And as much as it's felt tip pens, I think that this description with these tiny little bits of additional shadow give it a sense of depth and a bit more of a personality for this strange character who I've never spoken to, but I find quite engaging and an interesting person to continually describe, either in a sketchbook, for a challenge, or maybe in the future I might even paint him. So there it is, submission number 28. I think at least the number will be in the video description. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.